everybody. Well, welcome back from our little break. How amazing is the weather in California? So I'd like to just introduce, we're going to see a little something from Skin Medica, Allergan, as a prequel to our next session. So if we can see Skin Medica's new refresh and take on beauty. So I personally love the beauty that we see in these faces, fresh, hydrated, no makeup, but revealing the natural beauty. So, I mean, apparently I've been told that I'm glowing, and I know that my routine as a plastic surgeon, self-care Sundays mean something a little bit different, but I've tapped into a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about. So I'd love to introduce Dr. Stephanie Manson-Brown. I was very taken with her lovely accent at FDA panel a couple of years ago, and she hosts a fabulous meeting on anti-aging, and so she's an expert here. Also, Vice President and Head of Clinical Development at Allergan and AbbVie. And so I'll have you introduce our other fabulous panelists to get into anti-aging.
The trend and actually sit with my fellow panelists rather than standing at the podium. So first of all, I just want to thank Bill and Cara and the Octane ATS committee for inviting me to host this panel talking about the science of aging. Thank you for the introduction, Casey. So I'm Stephanie Manson-Brown, Vice President and Head of Clinical Development, Aesthetic Medicine at Allergan Aesthetics. I'm also the co-founder of the Science of Aging. So the Science of Aging, for those of you who don't know, is a platform that really was born out of a desire to bring the latest discovery and research happening and taking place in aging research and longevity science, and really bringing it into the aesthetics arena. And really in the view of seeing if there was some opportunities to extrapolate it and also translate it into aesthetic medicine. So I'm very excited and delighted to introduce you to our panelists today who are outstanding leaders in their areas of expertise. And they're going to share with you their insights and their points of view in this fascinating area and really talk about how it's going to impact medical care as well as aesthetic medicine now and later on and in the future. So I'll start first of all with Dr. Patricia Ogilvie. She has flown over from Germany to be here today at this event. So Patricia is a board-certified dermatologist based in Munich, and she's also certified in allergies and hypersensitivity and spent several years researching immunology and cell signaling as a postdoctorate research fellow. She, along with Dr. David McDaniel, is one of the co-chairs of Science of Aging and has been involved since the conception. Dr. David McDaniel is up here on screen, and I think we'll need to change the title underneath, but Dr. David McDaniel is a board-certified dermatologist and is a director of the Laser and Cosmetic Center in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He is also the director of the McDaniel Institute of Aging Research and is an adjunct assistant professor of biological sciences at Old Dominion University. He, like Patricia, co-chairs the Science of Aging and has been involved from the get-go as well. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Sophia Ononye-Onyia. Sorry, I've been practicing Sophia's name, Dr. OnonyeOnyia.
Good job.
And so thank you. She qualified as a molecular oncologist from Yale University and has moved into the world of entrepreneurship and is now a life science strategist. She's the founder and CEO of the Sophia consulting firm, a life science marketing and communications consultancy that was established with the goal of amplifying scientific innovation. So she also is the creator and host and producer of the accompanying video podcast, and I really would recommend that you access and give it a listen. She's been interviewing and having fascinating discussions with multiple different guests. She was a moderator for the cellular senescence session at the Science of Aging event in September last year. So getting us kicked off for this discussion, I just wanted to acknowledge, I think we can all say that aging is undeniably universal. It's the underlying process that links all living species, and it is something that we've been told in the past that it's inevitable. But is it? Is this something that in the future we could actually be facing aging without developing the signs, the symptoms, the comorbidities and mortality associated with aging. For those of you, and me included, who went to medical school, we were taught that all of the different chronic diseases arose from different unique processes. However, what we've learned, and there's been a lot of research taking place looking at the basic biology of aging, and it's really been progressing since the 1980s. And what we now understand is that aging is actually linked by a couple of common, very complex pathways and processes. And these are called the hallmarks of aging. And at the moment, there's about 9, well, there are 9 identified. And these include, just to name a couple, mitochondrial dysfunction, epigenetic alteration, cellular senescence. We also look at stem cell exhaustion. So these are just a couple of the ones. So with that in mind, there's been quite an explosion of research in this area, and it's certainly piqued a lot of interest. So now that we've got a better understanding of aging, and it's really been seen as a time point seminal time point in scientific medical research. So I'm really intrigued just to now turn to our panelists and really ask you, what excites you about this field, and what is the possible impact for humans as we age? So David, I'm going to start off with you.
Stephanie, well, thanks for including me. I'm so sorry I can't be there with you and the team and my friends today due to a last-minute issue, but I'm there in spirit. So there's so many exciting things. The Science of Aging Symposium has been one of the highlights of my career, actually. I think a part of this excitement is just the literal exponential increase in scientific knowledge. It's compressed into such a short time compared to when we were in medical school. Also, in parallel, it's the acceleration of the translation of these discoveries. And I think they're going to change healthcare, and I think they're going to usher in a new era of personalized care. And I think it's also an opportunity to address our uniqueness, as Carrie mentioned earlier, not just one face for beauty, many faces, many uniqueness. So I think the potential is there to change the face of healthcare and aesthetics, but also I think the potential is there to lift the global disease burden. There are so many people afflicted in developing countries that aesthetics is just the most remote thing. They're really there for survival. So I think not only in the developing countries, but in our own country, we have the opportunity to really address disparities of healthcare. And I think it's a very exciting few years ahead. Just to throw out one idea that I had is imagine an mRNA vaccine that could treat malaria that was affordable, that we could put around the world. So exciting times for all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Patricia, I'm eager to hear your thoughts.
I would say, how can one not be fascinated about aging? Since we have transcripts of what moved mankind, we know that people were fascinated by this phenomenon that our life is inevitably ending. So just as a human, curious human being, I think I can't stop but being fascinated by it. As a scientist, and I used to be a bench working scientist for a while in my career, I would echo what David has just said. It's an unprecedented convergence of different streams of research that all come together. All roads lead to aging science, if you want. It very much mirrors or parallels what happened in the field of cancer research some decades ago. And with the same impact, we are seeing the knowledge coming from bench to bedside at an amazing pace. And with the integration of bioinformatics, analysis of big and smart data, and AI, it's just going to be an unprecedented progress in the field. And thirdly, I would say I'm a dermatologist. As a clinician, I'm a dermatologist. Scientifically speaking, what we are dealing with the patients we see is the aging phenotype. So what we do see, we are actually the first point of contact for these people. Before they even realize that they are aging, they come to us because they say, I'm not sick, but I'm not the same either. And that's exactly what aging is. So it's the skin at the forefront of what happens inside is an interesting target, not only as it reflects what's going on inside, but there's also a mounting body of evidence that we are aging from outside inside. So I can't help but being fascinated by being in the aging research field. And I think the last point I want to make is I think passion is contagious, and I am passionate about that. I'm passionate about sharing this knowledge, and I think knowledge is an underestimated commodity. If I look at the progress that aging research has made in the last 2 decades since I have left medical school, I'm grateful for a curated resource that helps me keeping up to date with all these progresses. And there's a blank space, and that's where Science of Aging as a platform is filling a gap, which is also important for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that recognition there. And actually, to quote Nancy Atkoff, who's a professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, so she actually says that the skin's a certificate of underlying health. So Sophia, really keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It's the first time I've been on a plane since January 2020. But one of the things I love, and I hope you can hear me okay, one of the things I love about aging is that we all have an opinion. We have a perspective. For me, mine is from West Africa. I was born in Nigeria. I came to the US 20 years ago. I did research in histone diacetylases as a PhD student, and my intent at the time was more from a hallmarks of cancer perspective. I wanted to understand the roles that these enzymes played in DNA regulation and also tumorigenesis and such. But one of the things I loved about the past year was getting a chance to moderate a session at the Science of Aging Symposium where I started to think deeper, longer around cancer biology and its relativity to aging, right? So I think that sometimes when we think about aging, it's more sort of almost superficial. I have wrinkles. Not to say that it's not important. It's very important to manage those things. But I think what we have to understand is this sort of the more holistic version, the holistic component of aging. As you age, your skin is the largest organ in your body, right? How are we taking care of that? And there are different types of skin. I think for the longest time, we've relied on the Fitzpatrick skin types, but then obviously people like me are going to be excluded from that. So what can we do to expand our mindset, to take the biology, the innovations that we have out in different disease states? How can we learn from that, tap into that, and to think about aging in a more holistic, more comprehensive perspective? There's, of course, the superficial aspect, but we are thinking about, as we live longer, as longevity becomes a topic for anyone around the world, how can we as scientists, as physicians, as people reinforce the state of science and to evolve what we currently know about aging? And that's why I'm here today, and hopefully we're gonna have a great conversation today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is about raising that awareness of actually really understanding that aging can actually have potential interventions to be able to help expand that health span that was mentioned on earlier panel discussions. So we're here, and this is aesthetics, obviously the focus. So Patricia, what are your thoughts with regards to how is this field potentially influencing aesthetic medicine?
I mean, without understanding, and when I say understanding means a deep understanding of the current, where are we with the knowledge, we are doing just cosmetics. We need to understand the underlying mechanisms as we understand them today, and of course our knowledge is limited by factors, and this is why this knowledge is constantly growing. But at the end of the day, we are doctors. I don't like to see myself as a customer in the first line. I am a doctor, and I have the obligation to understand what I'm actually treating. And if it is an aging phenotype that I'm treating, I still have the obligation to understand, to the best of my knowledge and my capacity, what is actually happening. So if we see someone with sagging skin and wrinkles, and I actually know that there is evidence that sagging skin is influenced by many factors, but it's also the accumulation of what we call senescent cells. It helps me gaining a deeper understanding of the molecular and cellular dynamics of what I'm actually treating. And by that, I'm becoming a better and more responsible doctor in the field. And that is, I think it's a mandate. It's a mandate to be updated on what's going on.
Absolutely. So, yeah, David, we'll pass over to you. How are you seeing that this is influencing aesthetic medicine?
Well, I think the impact, Stephanie, I think it's already occurring. It's just, as a practicing clinician myself as well, we don't quite have those things in our hands yet to offer our patients. And the regulatory processes in the different countries, they do delay things. So what we're seeing, for example, with the Science of Aging Symposium and in our professional meetings in plastics and derm and ENT and facial plastics, we're seeing the end result of what was talked about earlier at the beginning of this meeting. So the pipeline is rich, it's broad, it's wide. We just don't quite see it yet, but it's coming very soon. I also think that we'll begin to see very soon the transition from just rejuvenation, repair, to actually regeneration. And when Bhushan was speaking earlier, I think he touched on something very simplistically in my mind. I think that the birth of a wrinkle is the end visible phenotype result of a long series of years or decades of imperfectly repaired injuries to the skin. So whether they're environmental aggressors or, as he was talking about, mechanical shear. So we have this huge part of our aesthetic practice is basically toxins and fillers, and the toxins tend to treat the mechanical shear and that damages the dermal matrix, and the fillers plump them up. But John Voorhees did this similar work that showed that stretching fibroblasts, the cells that make collagen and elastin, that actually stimulated the production. So we're going to be going from fillers and toxins, I think, that basically have one facet to, my vision is think of injectables as care devices that not only have an immediate benefit, but they basically change the software. They reprogram the skin to repair itself, to regenerate it. And I think those are not far off. So these are very exciting times.
Watch this space, I think, is a comment I'd like to add to that. So Sophia, you provide a lot of consultancy and advice to Bitex. So kind of from your perspective, how are Bitex embracing longevity and aging research?
Yeah, and that's a great question. One of my best examples is actually CoPlan Biotechnologies. They are located in Israel, and they were presented in the, 2020? Science of Aging Symposium. And one of the things I loved about them was around this concept of regenerative medicine, which of course David just teed up nicely. But we are thinking about how do we leverage what we know is a phenomenon today, which is around tailored, personalized medicine. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but how can we improve skin cell turnover, for example, and a company like CoPlan that are looking at tobacco plants and transgenically modified tobacco plants, and how do we take collagen out of that and actually use that to think about how we manage the process of aging, but also to think about that from a 3D bioprinting perspective. We're talking about printed kidneys, hearts, lungs, etc., right? So there is a place where things are going. But one of the things I love to see beyond just that one example is an appreciation of the fact that we're living longer. How can we improve the quality of our life as a result of that? I'm always fascinated by companies that look at psychosocial factors, the social determinants of health, barriers to care, diversity in skin types. I imagine compared to the two ladies beside me, I might have a little bit more melanin than they do. What does that mean for my skin type? Have we studied that long enough to understand why I am more prone to hyperpigmentation, for example? And while I might not worry so much about getting a lip filler necessarily, but there are other things that that are concerning to me. So I think that there are lots of exciting, sophisticated technologies that if I started talking about each of them, we'll probably get bored and fall asleep. But one of the things I love about the whole concept of amplifying scientific innovation are the conversations around health equity, around science advocacy, and influential leadership. So technologies are great, but if we cannot find ways to ensure access to those types of technologies for the people that may or may not be able to afford, the people that do not have enough information about it, that's where communication comes in. And on my podcast, I had interviewed the chief medical officer of WebMD, and one of my favorite quotes from that conversation was when Dr. John White emphasized the importance of communication as a tool to impact many. That's why we're here today. So the beauty of any technology is only as good as its ability to impact as many people as possible. And I think that instead of talking so much about the innovation part, which is great. Let's spend some time thinking about access and making sure we're understanding different types of skin and different types of problems that people in different parts of the world might have. Yes, they may not be able to afford a lot of these types of skin regimens that we have access to here, but we have the power to educate and to inform and to actually empower people in developing parts of the world to think about biotechnology as well, think about ways that they can innovate so that people that have unique types of skins, apart from the normal skin conditions that we tend to see, that we're also paying attention to them. That to me is the power of innovation.
Absolutely. I've been listening to that intently, and I think that when we talk about communication and awareness, it's really, really key, and making sure that we are using these platforms to enable accessibility. So that really kind of like ties in nicely. You know, one of the concepts or one of the drivers around the Science of Aging platform was really to continue to educate, to bring data, research, and discoveries to a group who perhaps hadn't tapped into it before, because a lot of the longevity and aging research was focused on chronic disease, for example, oncology. So this is where there's a really strong link that we can bring it into aesthetics, because as we're talking about, there's common processes underlying that. And the Science of Aging platform has actually been running for just over 3 years. We're entering into our 4th year, so very similar to ATS. We started off as one single scientific symposium in person. We then obviously flexed to virtual, obviously having to adapt to the pandemic like we all have been doing. And last year we ended up running, or we focused on running 2 events, expanding our geographical reach and focusing on Asia Pacific as well. We really are starting to build a faculty of the who's who of aging and longevity research. We had David Sinclair, Judy Campisi, we've had Susan Bailey from NASA, we've had Anna Maria Cuervo. The list goes on. We also had the Chief Scientific Officer from BioLife Sciences, who you heard from earlier. Really fascinating discussions, and obviously we've got faculty members sitting here today in our panel. So just on that note, I'm really keen to know, David, do you have a favorite session or presentation or topic that you've seen being presented at any of our previous events?
All of them.
Yeah.
Patricia and I were talking earlier, and so we overlap quite a bit, so I'll leave her for hers, but one of my special passions is senescence, probably not necessarily related to the fact that it benefits me personally, but I think the senescence research is interlinked to so many things, and just each area of the hallmarks of aging, these are going to translate into therapeutics for both medical and aesthetic, and they're intertwined in their pathways, and I think, as was just mentioned earlier, I co-direct also the Hampton University Skin and Color Research Center, and we see the potential to look at these pathways as they affect different ethnicities, different ancestries, different age points, prejuvenation, rejuvenation, regeneration. So, but yes, senescence, I think, is just about to explode in many, many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually ended up doing two sessions on cell senescence 2 years in a row, just because of the complexity, but also the growing field. There's so much happening in that space. Patricia, over to you. Can you choose a favorite?
It's hard. I would say my scientist heart really loves the mitochondrial aging part a lot. We had an amazing presentation in our inaugural meeting when it was still live, and introducing a mouse model for mitochondrial aging, which has this fascinating phenotype, which shows a lot of the actual phenotypic features of aging, like wrinkled skin and grayed thin hair, and the interventions in that model that really reverted that process is just fascinating. It seems to be a long way to go for clinical application, whereas the clinician side of myself is fascinated by the epigenetic evolution, if you want, just the sheer concept that our DNA is not the script that we have to live in, and our aging destiny is set in stone by how we are born, but a large part of it is just down to our lifestyle habits, or even lifestyle choices, if you want. So that is fascinating, and that bears a lot of potential in advising patients. And again, as our patients are not living under a stone either, we have informed patients that come to our offices, and we need to be ahead of the game and know answers, and help them also carefully curate the content of what they are hearing, what they are reading. Some things are just over-promising, some things are relatively realistic goals in closer reach. It's important to be at the forefront of the knowledge for us, also to give them good advice.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, again, really speaks to the science of aging. And I think that's one concept that's becoming very, very clear. Aging is malleable. It's not a linear, consistent process. It can be influenced by different interventions. Sophia, have you got a favorite?
Yes, slightly biased, of course. I moderated a Senescence session at the last Science of Aging Symposium, and I loved it. But I loved it differently than I thought I would. I came in thinking like a cancer biologist. Let's talk science. Let's talk epigenetics. Let's go crazy about all the good technological innovations. But then something struck me, which is around this concept of bioethics. We know out there that these are senolytic drugs that you can buy on Amazon that promise everything. And so the question I had posed to our panel, who were exceptional, by the way, was around, do we have a duty of care to actually inform patients and say to them, caution, be very cautious about what you buy on Amazon as it relates to the field of senolytics, because there's just too much, how do I say this nicely, junk out there. And to me, I think therapeutics without guidance is sort of somewhat one-sided. That's why clinicians exist for a reason, to provide the right type of guidance, right? So I think that as we think about the age, there's so many other factors beside the biology of it, or even the clinical aspect of it. We could talk about bioethics, we could talk about the psychosocial factors, level of education that some of our consumers or patients have in terms of the ability to go out there and get products online or whatever the case might be. So I think as we think about the science of aging, the complexity of it, and sort of how do we exist in all of it, and what do we owe ourselves, that sort of bidirectional informed consent. How much do we educate patients/consumers, how much do they educate themselves, et cetera, and how much do we educate the public, the regulators, on what is accessible to patients without the right type of guidance. Those are some of the thoughts that we discussed during the last panel, and I think that the next one will even be better.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and looking forward to that. And I think, that's such an important point. And I think, certainly as for those of us, working in the industry side, and we very well know that there's very clear guidelines and regulations with regards to clinical trials and how we generate that data. But there is a lot out there. There are some unjustified and unsubstantiated claims that are available with some of the, let's say, products and potential nutrients, supplements, etc., and that are out there. So it is just about kind of taking that care and making sure that there's not necessarily that kind of link, and that some of the claims that could be a little bit, but can be overconflated. And I think, just sticking on that kind of topic with the idea around bioethics, Patricia, anything that you'd like to add to that? Because it is such a big topic with regards to kind of how we I guess address this.
And I would just like to go back to how instrumental knowledge on a broader perspective is here for doctors and for patients. And I like to think of it like we speak about patients making informed decisions when we are consenting them, for example, for surgical or non-surgical procedures. We need to make informed decisions as well as doctors, and we need to have the knowledge. A lot of the data have been generated in animal models, just to pick out one. So there is still a long way to go from transitioning the data that we have from animals into humans, and with all the implications doing human trials with these kind of compounds. That is a huge bioethical issue, I think. And we just have to know. I mean, we used to say in the lab, it's nice, but it's mice. And we knew which data were generated in humans and which data were not. People do not actually know. So there is promising data out there which has been generated in C. elegans, which is nice, but it's a worm. So so just to get an idea about the horizon and the timeline, it is important to be informed. And I think it's in the very genuine interest of the industry to have, and I love to hear the instrumental importance of KOLs, but who is a KOL if we are not closing that knowledge gap? And you need informed doctors to help you also develop the next generation of products. Aging is the opposite of a rare disease. Obviously, it affects everybody. It's frustrating, it's intimidating, it's threatening, but it's fair because it affects everybody. So everybody's interested in finding answers, but there are still a lot of questions. So yeah. I'm a question person. Yeah.
And curiosity, and actually they say that curiosity, if you have curiosity, that also helps with your longevity. And I think that's important, taking data generated in the controlled preclinical phase, you always need to make sure that it is translatable, and clinical meaningfulness is really important because human beings are complex and there's a lot of confounding factors when you start to translate it into the clinical setting. David, Sophia touched on it a little bit earlier about the accessibility, and that's some of the kind of the big topics around, equal access, and we know that often some of the diagnostics, the interventions that are available around longevity medicine are relatively expensive or can be quite expensive. So, and that then often means that those who are already well off are able to benefit. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, that's a very good question. It's also an issue of leadership and knowledge. When Sophia and Patricia were talking, I thought, so many of my patients are confused because they read so much. So the clinical trial data, we're all scientists, clinicians, but I think sometimes my patients need a guide through the jungle of information, and they're inundated with this. And so people really don't, whether it's an investor, an entrepreneur, or even a physician, the information overload is huge. But also, this leads, there's a disparity of healthcare, there's a disparity of information that's, the loudest voice is not always the accurate voice, the voice of science. And then we have the issue of disparities of wealth, and that you were sort of alluding to. So if you look back, I've thought a lot about this, we've talked about it. Historically, some of the great advances in science and technology, they've mostly come from visionaries. And they often come from entrepreneurs, startups. They don't necessarily come from the large companies which can do the elegant studies, but those are generally not the well-funded people, as most of you in the room know. So, sometimes the source of wealth to finance these and the visionary may be the same person, but historically, typically there's a person or an entity that funds these. And so these days we're seeing some very high net worth people funding their visions. And to me, anything that helps advance the science, solid science, it advances health span, it benefits all of us. And to the extent that that can have the cost brought down, for example, these rapid changes are occurring because of advances even from COVID, unfortunately, has changed PCR and things, but we're going to see the cost of the technology, the time frame of the technology has come way down in just a very short time. So for the investors and the entrepreneurs, you have the opportunity to de-risk your investments and accelerate the time frame of this technology. And to the extent that any high net worth people or companies accelerate that and it's available to us all, I think it does benefit us. But one of my concerns, and we've alluded to it earlier, is longevity without health. Without good health is not a goal I personally aspire to. So I would rather see us extend health span. I know UK, Stephanie knows more than I do, that there's an initiative to improve, use public government money to improve health span for everyone. And then it would be really nice to extend longevity. I applaud that too, but I'd like to see the health span be extended. And I think we get lost in living longer and not able to enjoy life. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I think that I couldn't agree more. I think health span is such a key focus. So I'm just conscious of time. I did want to just make sure that The group here are aware we do actually support the science of aging with our social media channels. So please do come and join us on LinkedIn and on Instagram. You can find us at Science of Aging on Instagram and Science of Aging on LinkedIn. So we'd love you to come. That's really there to continue the narrative and to continue bringing the latest in aging research. And we've also partnered with the Plastics and Reconstructive Surgery Journal, so PRS. And so we have brought out supplements to support the scientific symposia. And it's just a wealth of incredible, fascinating science to read. So it's a great way just to go. So December supplement from last year and also from 2020. So it's available in open access. So no excuses. I'd urge you to go and read up on it and get your knowledge up on this area. So with that, I just want to thank the panelists. I have been looking forward to this for quite some time. So it's been a fantastic, fascinating, and engaging discussion. And I'm always intrigued and always very, very keen to hear your thoughts on the whole aging and longevity science.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.